Greetings, colleagues. Welcome to Psychology of Gender, Psych 205, that still says Chapter 10. Let me fix that up real quick. 205, Intro, Part 1. There we go. Great. So we're going to start at least prefacing the text at this point. The author is going to go into a much less detailed analysis of sex and gender than we're about to do now. But we have to do this stuff. We have to clear the air, clear the table, define our terms. This is going to be the most culture war we ever get in this class. It's, as I said, it's not a culture war class, right? It's a science class, and we're going to get into the science of things. Science starts with taxonomy. We have to label and illustrate the units of study and sort of establish the scope of our science. You know, what are we looking at? What are we not looking at? And this is, I mean, it's much to do with language. So many of the people who still are resistant to even the study of gender, or especially the feminist positions or sort of freedom with identity, which is not what this class is about. They like to argue the language. They just like to say, well, sex and gender are the same thing. And so that's just to shut down a conversation, right? If you can't agree to use the terms in this narrow confine where we're meeting together to do this class, if you can't agree to the words that we're going to use to discuss the phenomenon, phenomena, then you're out. That's it. You're not playing. You're sitting in the corner, sort of sulking and sucking your thumb. There are phenomena here. We need words to describe those phenomena so we can study those phenomena. So here we go. All right. All the way up until today, basically, sex and gender have meant the same thing. It's really only in the last 5 years that in academia, sex and gender really means something quite different. People have always tried to study gender, and the people studying gender used sex and gender interchangeably up until really the last few years. Robert Sapolsky, I call him Bob because I'm also a doctor like he is. Bob Sapolsky, he has this fabulous series of lectures. They're online. You can go on YouTube and get his whole Stanford course, 45 hours of lecture on, on anthropology, psychology, and evolutionary biology, all in one course. It's fantastic. And it's like 7 or 8 years old. So even this high level human scientist with respect all across the spectrum uses sex and gender interchangeably. This is a problem in science, is that we often pick up words that are already in common usage and then assign new meanings to them and expect everyone to understand that right away. But that's really what's going on in this class, right? We're going to define our terms like so. This is perfectly ordinary. Science always does this. We define our terms at the outset. Sex. Sex is the noun. Biology, right? Arguably, the chromosomes you have, the hormones you have, the genitalia that you have, maybe some other biological stuff like the brain stuff is a little bit wishy-washy even still, but you know that. And the verb, right? So sex, I didn't even do this one. Science didn't do this one. It just came up in language that sex is the parts you have and the act of attempting to reproduce, right? The getting together and the bumping of uglies and all that, right? You know what it is. We're not gonna spend really any, maybe like 12 minutes of time late in the course on that. Not how to, but how do men and women experience sex and sexuality the same and differently. Gender, though, the thing people often don't want to talk about, that we're here to talk about, is this. It's the socially constructed expectations for behavior based on that assignment at birth, usually done by just a cursory examination of the baby's genitals, unless something else is going on. Looks like a boy to me, that's a boy. Looks like a girl to me, that's a girl. And unless there's some reason to probe deeper, that's it. And then like your whole life is really defined in many ways by that initial cursory examination, right? Why'd I skip all this? Because all this is really largely tied in with behavior. So the expectations for your behavior include your appearance. What do men look like? What do women look like? What are the roles that we are expected to play in society? Men don't cry, and women nag, or whatever the stereotypes are. Women nurture, and our relative value, right? So boys are worth more than girls in most societies. You keep trying until you have a boy. In cultures where reproduction is limited, China's one-child policy resulted in the abortion or abandonment of a lot of female infants, because until they did a lot of work on their own gender standards, boys were really valued a lot more than girls. And so now there's this sex imbalance, and the accompanying gender imbalance, of course, in China, that at this point is quite well known. A lot of men with no prospects ever to marry. And then sexual preference. Let me change that word real fast. I'll explain later. Sexual orientation being something actually quite different. It's not really tied in with gender, although it might have consequences for gender expression. It's not really tied in with the biology of sex, although it might have consequences for the verb form. The biology form is more interesting here. So when you see that long acronym, GLBTQIA+, sexual orientation is the parts of those that really don't relate to biology or gender assignments, arguably. So gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual, pan would be in the plus part over here, and all the newer stuff like demisexual and aro and all that stuff, that would be over in here. Questioning, so one's not really sure of one's orientation, started to have those epiphanies that maybe one doesn't like who one has been told they should like. And then queer is really, really complicated. It's it really does more properly go in gender expression. Queer is really that God, I'm going to use some sterner language than is really fitting here, because the language, especially in the science, the language hasn't quite caught up to where things are. It's the person who just doesn't conform with the sex identity or the gender identity that they're pressured to conform to, right? So someone who's queer might sort of smear their gender performances. Maybe we have someone assigned male at birth, but just doesn't perform male, just does their own thing, and sometimes takes on a female role or a third role, or dress how you want, wear women's clothes or men's clothes or whatever. You could get some androgyny in there. You could, and then that smears also over into sexuality. Men are supposed to like women, women are supposed to like men, but if you're queer, you might just sort of refuse to isolate into one performance, right? So that's sexual orientation, not preference anymore, orientation. Sexual preference was fine, again, up until a couple of years ago. Saying sexual preference was great, and we've just had another change in the standards, mostly because of pushback from the right, the political right, right, saying that that gay's not okay, and it's a choice, it's an immoral choice, and you can be gay without engaging in gay sex or gay romance, and you can just try to change your whole personality and live in a heterosexual universe, and all that is implied with the word preference. And it's just, well, I prefer being with men, or I prefer being with women, but I could, happily inhabit the other space. That's not it. The evidence doesn't support those ideas. Orientation's really, really where it's at. So what's the controversy here? There really isn't controversy. Just like in Culture War America, where every request for the same freedom everybody else has is met with derision and pushback and apologetics, and this really all benefits the right wing. You can get people, you can rile up people's limbic systems and just get them to join these like culture teams where you don't even have a political party anymore. You're just the culture war team on this side. Nothing gets done. Governance isn't a priority. That's who it profits when we do that. But there really isn't anything political in almost any of this. I mean, queer arguably is political, but not partisan political, like culture political. Okay. So this is us, this is science. When I say punishment, I mean something quite different than just a regular schmo on the street says when they say punishment. When I say positive, I almost always mean additive, not good, right? And so here we're doing this thing again where science picks up words people already know and then says you're wrong about the meaning of those words, sex and gender. In the vernacular, absolutely, they mean the same thing. There you go. You're talking about buying clothes, and what gender clothing are we looking at? Well, I mean, if you said what sex clothing, it would mean the same thing. In the vernacular, that's normal. We should come up with better words, honestly. Instead of saying gender, we should say plobium or some weird made up word, right? Ventrifacularism or something. That's ours, so that we don't get this pushback. Okay, and then just a note to everyone who wants to move forward with this is when you're talking to people, just be careful about your use of language. If you're talking to your grandmother at the home and she uses sex and gender, interchangeably, it's almost certainly fine. It's just that's language until right now. That's what that means. We're differentiating the terms because we need the terms to have a conversation about this sort of a unique specialty phenomenon that we intend to study. Okay, so it's probably not fitting or productive to go out into society and grab everyone by the collar and force them to use language our way. We're scientists doing science, and they're not. Sometimes it is important to do that, and I just kind of trust you to know the difference. Okay, so yeah, this is just an intro here, not the whole crash course. Good. We used to know stuff that we don't know anymore. And I'm playing with the word know. Know implies the thing that you know is factual, but we knew things that turned out not to be factual. They seemed factual at the time, but further study, the more you look at things, the less they are what they seem. So there used to be just two categories for sex. There's male and there's female, and there's nothing in between, and there's nothing outside, right? That's it, bipolar. Two buckets, and babies come out of wombs and you sort them into the buckets. Okay, and that's it. Even when it was obviously untrue that there were only two buckets. Because you have worms that reproduce asexually, and uh, uh, you know, almost everything, uh, uh, yeah, everything unicellular produces asexually, and plant sex is super strange, and um, different things switch sexes as needed, just not humans. We need help for that. God, even that's controversial now. Even when it was clearly untrue, we believed it was true of humans. Males, females, boys, girls, men, women. That's it. Okay. Um, even though about 4% of live births are in some way intersex. Now, that's a controversial statement. What does intersexed mean is absolutely at the heart of that question. And we're talking anything from traits from both male and female, anatomical traits, both male and female, to a disagreement between the outward manifestation and the chromosomal sex, and all the way to as minor as being born with a micropenis. And sort of prior to the current century, an intersexed baby would typically be assigned a sex through surgery. Often, not always, but often without the consent or even the knowledge of the parent. And not just when, in those super rare cases where we're born with a testicle and an ovary, or a penis and a vaginal opening. In the much more ambiguous cases where a boy is born with a micropenis, doctors used to believe that sex was entirely dependent on genitalia, that the genitalia make the hormones and the hormones make the brain and the behavior. There we go. Which was obviously untrue. There's chromosomes involved here too. So a boy born with a micropenis, the doctor might think, well, their life as a man with a really tiny penis is going to be unsatisfying. They'll never have a satisfying sex life. And so they would take that baby into the back and do a sex reassignment surgery and make that boy into a girl. But sex and gender are so much more complicated that those boys would grow up knowing that they weren't girls. They'd have those initial behaviors that get amplified by society, like preferring to play with guns and trucks, identifying more with their male than female role models, and so on, all the way up to that sexual orientation of generally preferring female over male partners. Really preference, that word again. We're all changing our language, right? It's just wrong. The morality of doing this to a child, well, they thought they were doing something good. Morality that's hazy and wishy-washy and ambiguous, but it's incorrect, right? Gentlemen, is the only thing about you the size of your penis? Is that it? Is that the end all be all of your satisfaction in life? Do you have no goals in life other than a satisfying sex life? Could you live without it? Are there other ways to have a satisfying sex life? Quevedochis present another challenge. It's really a form of testosterone, like a low-level testosterone immunity or underproduction. So Quevedochis born apparently outwardly female, right? So you have a baby and you look between her legs and you go, that's a girl. And then this is the assigned at birth thing, the language that really started showing up in more mainstream settings like 2 or 3 years ago. Assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth. Female looks female. We're in Dominican Republic. This is where this happens. Almost every case of this is, not every, but almost every, because we have a genetically isolated population largely. So bottlenecks, things can creep in. So born apparently female, treated female, raised female, goes to the female side of the school and wears dresses and so on and so on and so on. But between the 13th and 15th birthday, we have this sort of delayed puberty because of nutritional standards that aren't quite up to snuff, right? And that's the same reason this escapes detection, because we have medical standards that aren't as sort of lively and investigative as American medical standards. Very, very rural, very agrarian. Between birthday 13 and 15, though, a fully formed penis and testicles descend from the vagina, and what you thought was your little girl didn't grow up to be a woman. She grew up to be a man. This is tough. It's a real thing. You can look it up. I'm reasonably certain that's the correct spelling. Wavadochis. And it's, it's rare. It's much less rare than it is in other human populations because we have this genetic isolation, but it's not an everyday occurrence, and it kind of gets swept under the table. The normal way to handle it would be to pull her out of school and say she went on a trip, and then start dressing her in male clothing and send him to a new school with a new identity. I've been visiting cousins in America or whatever, and I'm back, and here I am. And people know it happens, and people, they have a hard time with it, but not as hard a time as it would be here because they have a little more experience, okay? So testosterone immunity, your body's making the appropriate amount of testosterone for your sex, but the receptor sites for testosterone aren't the shape that would accept it. So you have someone who has a XY chromosome, right? They're biologically male at the chromosomal level, and their body's making all this testosterone, and then the pituitary kicks on about age 11 and really amps that testosterone production, but it never lands. Everyone makes testosterone and estrogen. We make them in different balances. Women make more estrogen and a little testosterone, which is why after menopause, when that estrogen level drops, the testosterone is sort of allowed by the body to manifest more. And that's why we get that nose growth and the voice deepening a little, after age 55 or so, and the ears and so on, and that sort of masculinization post-menopause. So in this case, what we have is a person with an XY chromosome who just develops female, has female menses, can get pregnant, is in every important way female. Often not pregnant, because where ovaries should be, there's undescended testicles, at least most of the time. And so, maybe there's some reason where, we're trying to get pregnant, we're not getting pregnant, and we go looking and we find that unexpected finding. So genitalia just are unreliable markers of sex. Like, sex is a pretty good construct. It's a construct, absolutely. It's not as biologically secure and absolute as we might even want to think that it is. It's good enough. It gets the job done. Like, attaching to that is really the problem. And there are flaws here. It's a concrete foundation, and there are cracks in it, and stuff can drop down in there. What about let's don't even get into secondary sex characteristics, right? A masculine looking woman or a feminine looking man or anything like that. At the base of this pillar, genitalia just aren't reliable. They're largely reliable. They're good in most cases, nearly every case, I grant you. But there is a flaw here. So, right, what about chromosomes? X, double X, XY. Cool. God writing in the gene code, whatever. It's not even the most common way to do sex. Bugs have sort of an XZ chromosome. Double X, XZ. Amphibians don't have chromosomal sex at all. There's no difference between male and female in their chromosomal makeup. It's temperature regulated. How warm, what's the temperature at which the eggs incubate? That's what determines the prevalence of males versus females in the population, and males being relatively scarce. And amphibians can spontaneously change sex. If there aren't males around to fertilize the eggs, then some of the females will they're not making a choice, but they'll sort of take one for the team and bite the bullet and flip over to male. What I'm trying to tell you here is that the natural world is no kind of guide to morality, right? So there's this pushback on sex and gender freedom. Look, gender revolution is for libertarians. If you're sort of politically on the right of the issue, then you're politically inconsistent. This is freedom. It's about freedom. Morality is just a construct. We decide what that is. It doesn't come from nature, right? So when we're trying to do same-sex marriage laws, and then politicians come in and they say, well, but this is an unnatural thing. It's against what God has ordained in creation, or something like that. Bullshit. We have so many examples of like monogamous gay albatrosses. Going to the albatross first, because we have gay lions, and the sort of political opposition is that's about domination, like men in jail. Not, not really. Most obviously in the gay monogamous, penguins and albatross and so on, no domination in it. They live lives just like any other pair bonded heterosexual animal of their kind. It's just so common. If we look at almost any species long enough, we find same-sex sexual relationships among them, right? It's a con, it's a ripoff. But then the advocates for these freedoms kind of make the mistake of falling into that conversation and also using the natural world. Because we have gay penguins, we should have gay people. And that's not correct. It's all a distraction. What's in nature is just like savagely amoral. Bugs that lay their eggs in toads' brains and like take over the toad. We have a virus that infects mice. And is it a virus or a parasite? It's a parasite. And the parasite infects mice, but to reproduce, it needs to get into a cat's digestive tract. So at the right stage of its development, it infects the rat's brain, making it sexually attracted to the smell of cats, so that these mice are running up to cats trying to mate with them, so that the cat will murder them and eat them, and then that parasite in the mouse or the rat can get into the cat's digestive tract. We have this is all reproduction, right? What else do we have? Praying mantis. The male praying mantis, its sexual behavior is not in its brain. It's at the top of its spine. So you can take off its head, and it will keep doing what it needs to do in order to reproduce with the female mantis. And this has evolutionary value. Once the male has deposited his sperm packet, he's of no further use in that reproduction. But the bug's life is hard. The praying mantis, being a fairly large insect comparatively, it needs a lot of food, and the female needs a lot of food to produce eggs. Like, her bio-investment in the eggs is much higher than the male's bio-investment in the eggs. So the male mounts the female, and she bites his head off, and that's sort of that's the courtship, right? The male has shown that he's willing to feed the female so that she can bear that clutch of eggs, and she does. She bites his head off, and then when the mating's over, she eats the male's body. So, like, going to the natural kingdom for our morality, our morality about sex and gender and stuff, it's not there. It's insane, right? Savagely amoral. The savage garden, as Anne Rice would call it, right? Aesthetic morality. You pick what you like, and that's what's good. That's crap. There's really no basis for deciding what's moral. A conversation for another time. But it's a shell game, and I'll spend more time on that down here at this point. It's a shell game. So what about people? What about people and chromosomes? Well, it's not a perfect system. It's a good enough system. It's gotten us this far, right? There's almost 8 billion humans on planet Earth. We're doing fine. But it's not perfect. You know, this stuff at the top of the list, the Guaivadochis, the testosterone immunity, just 2 examples. You could also have 3 copies of the X at chromosome 23, right? Instead of an XY or an XX, you have XXX, and that's going to result in serious complications, maybe. Often mental retardation and infertility and so on. Someone with XO would have eponymously Turner's syndrome. That's 1 X chromosome and nothing in that second position. So they will be anatomically female, assigned female at birth, if you like, with no capacity to ever have puberty. They'll be short-statured. They won't make growth hormones in the way that the average person makes growth hormones. You have to provide those artificially during puberty. And you can provide hormones to cause those menses and that reproductive capacity, but it's going to be a long conversation, because with a really small frame and a bunch of possibly dietary problems and other problems, is a pregnancy really something that body can sustain, and so on and so on. So there's lots of these. There's just 2. There's lots of these where. What else? The Y chromosome is shrinking over evolutionary time, right? There's less and less information encoded on this Y chromosome. That's why it's a Y shape, right? A gene, take a piece of string and twist it and twist it and twist it, right? And when you've got as much twist in as will go, it'll start to loop around itself. That's called a supercoil. Then you grab each end of that when it's all supercoiled, and you twist that, and it coils again and again and again, right? And you're starting off with something like literally this long when you stretch it out, but only 2 atoms wide. So you can do that so many times. And what you get eventually is that characteristic X shape of a chromosome. And what's happening is that over time, the Y chromosome is shortening so that there isn't enough information to make that last arm. You get this shape kind of instead, right? It's missing a whole arm of information. It's unnecessary. The differences between us are not so great as to require a whole different chromosome. And over time, not really sure why, the chromosome is getting shorter and shorter. So it'll start to lose this arm as well, right? And then it'll be just like a salad noodle chromosome that shortens and shortens until all the necessary stuff to do with making testicles and whatever is on there. All right. So even sex is not a constant, and it never has been. So we want to argue about gender. I don't want to argue about gender. That's not what the class is about. But people want to have that argument. It might be why you're here. In which case, like, listen to this session and go, because there's nothing else here for you, right? Wrapping it up early for you. So sex is the foundation for gender, but as society gets freer and freer and more of our behavior is encoded in our mores and our culture and society, and less in our sort of genetic blueprints, the less that foundation makes any sense for the way we talk about or enact or judge gender. So it's an imperfect foundation. There are cracks in it. It's good. It's got us this far. What's it for? Well, it's for knowing who to hit on. So I don't have, you might have noticed already, I don't really have a ton of frontal lobes. I'm not inhibited. I say what I think. I can't stop. I would if I could, but I can't stop saying what I think. So I'm at a conference, humanistic conference, and one of my colleagues is apparently male, like bigger than me, like 6'3" and broad in the shoulders, and works out and presents this very masculine physical archetype. But they show up in a dress and heels. And in high heels, I mean, when you're 6'3" and you're wearing 3-inch heels, you're going to get a lot of attention. Cannot pass. Passing when people just accept that you're the gender you're performing. But they feel good in those clothes, and probably that queer designation is all about them. Just feel better in that identity, and has no intention ever to have gender confirmation surgery, what we would have called sex reassignment. Even 10 years ago, we would have said sex reassignment. Gender confirmation now. And another colleague sort of confided, I know this shouldn't make me uncomfortable, but it does. My mind just gets hung up on the question, is this a man or a woman? And I can't make it stop. And just being who I am, for better or worse, I just looked at her and said, are you trying to fuck him? She goes, well, no. Then why does it matter? What difference does it make? She goes, oh, thank you. That's really it. That's what all this is for. Knowing who's male and who's female, right? You know who your competition is, and you know who your prospects are. Look, all of your ancestors who didn't have sex are not your ancestors. Okay? So let's do politics for a second. Liberalism is not what Fox News says it is. Sorry. You don't get to define your opponent's political position. That's nonsense. Liberalism is about freedom. All right? Liberal is not opposite conservative. Liberal is opposite authoritarian. And liberal and libertarian are just very fractionally different positions on the same end of the spectrum. Okay? Liberal or libertarian or Enlightenment era, authoritarian. Liberal, libertarian, Enlightenment, authoritarian. And then on this spectrum, you'll have progressive and conservative. Conservative, we continue to do the same things the same way every day. We make social change really slowly, if at all. And at this end, you have progressive, let's legislate a whole bunch of things to make society the way we want, usually fairer and freer. Conservatives used to be the liberals, now conservatives are the authoritarians. When Fox News lies to you and you believe them, that's authoritarianism. The ability to say what's true is the ultimate authority. When the president tweets, the 2016 to 2021 president tweets 20 lies a day on average, escalating to 100 or more lies a day during difficult times like the 2018 and the 2020 election, that's authoritarianism. If they lie and you believe them, they have the ultimate authority. Opposing liberals morphs into opposing liberalism. And in liberalism, we give people good information and trust them to make good decisions. And we're always really concerned about the most freedom for the most people. That's at the heart. It's much more complicated. At the heart, that's liberalism. And when you oppose liberals, you start to become illiberal. That is, you slip not away from progress, but towards authoritarianism. That's really what's happened in American politics in the last decade and a half, really. This is an increasingly liberal society. And biology is just less and less an apt basis for gender. Women don't need men as much. And we'll see that in the material a lot. And what else? Gosh. There's so many ways to make money and make a living, and so many freedoms are protected. People have always not really felt terribly much the gender that they were made to play. And now we just have the freedom to say so. That's it. America is imperfect. Yeah, I hear you. In a lot of ways, it sucks, and it always has. When the founders wrote the Constitution, they enshrined a set of values that were not really actually present anywhere in the world, even in America at the time, right? All men are created equal. Yeah. All men are created equal. But men really meant white property owning men, and certainly not women. And it took generations to get women the right to vote. And it took generations to get rid of slavery, to eliminate the idea of the second-class citizen or 3/5 of a person. But the ethical code, the Enlightenment liberalism enshrined and coded in that initial set of values in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, made it so we couldn't do anything else. Slavery was wrong. And it was not sustainable in these United States once we wrote that Constitution. So the American journey has really been this path towards more and more freedom for more and more people. Who is us? That category keeps expanding. Who we include in the in-group keeps expanding. Yeah. I've only been, to borrow the word, even though I know it's problematic to do so, just because there aren't any other words, I only came out as autistic 7 years ago. Because before that, I was not really free to do so. The punishment structure was too harsh. for varying from the neurotypical identity. Okay. Sex differences. Humans are the least dimorphic of the great apes. We might have about a 10% physical stature difference. I don't mean body weight, because when you look around America, we're so heavy because of the way food is done here. I mean skeletal stature. Right? Even in more normal conditions, women are going to store a little more body fat, and our strategies for storing fat are going to be a little different. Really, hardly any difference in average strength, and only at the very top end of physical performance is there like a ceiling on this. So over almost 100 years of record keeping, men's and women's times in the 100 meters, they vary by about 1 second, right? And those go up at basically the same rate year after year after year, or down, I guess, is the times, right? But the performance goes up by the same rate every Olympics. So that, if you just grabbed an average man and an average woman and had them do a foot race, it'd be a toss-up. Men on average would win, but it might be like 53 to 47%, not just. So there's tons of women who would beat men in the foot race, you know what I mean? Small average differences. And so if you take an average man and train a woman, then she's going to beat him every time, you see what I mean? Like that. So the less liberal a society, the more that sex differences matter. The more that reproduction is urgent and competition is really high and so on. Behavioral differences between males and females tend to be this: minor, situational, and by and large socially constructed, or at least socially amplified. And then if you want to talk brains, like everything you've heard about brains, whichever political position it's coming from, it's just bullshit. Sorry. I'm sorry. So here's a really great Royal Institute lecture. I've forgotten the name of the presenter. She's great. And the Q&A that follows that is even better. And this is called Neuro Nonsense. It's just going to break down, all the ways we think we know about sex and gender differences in brains, and like show you why the conclusions are totally spurious. We know almost nothing. Okay, good. So gender is really what we decide men, women, and maybe people who don't identify as either later, how those folks ought to act. What's masculine, what's feminine. And come on, please don't bring up Native American culture as a broad sweeping catch-all. Third gender, Native Americans believed in third gender. I think our author is gonna get into this specifically. Unless you can name a tribe, unless you can point to a historical record, then what you're doing is outgroup homogeneity. You're treating all Native American people as though they're the same, whereas in fact there were thousands and thousands of tribes, all with their own unique cultural practices and very little agreement between them. There are examples around the world, and our book will spend more time on that specifically. So culture is about time and place. So if you look around the world, if you look at America before colonists got here, even in the USA. So British mores around gender, to be masculine rather than feminine. This is all the stuff that was considered masculine. The masculine person was well educated. They went to the best school. They spoke Church Latin and Greek and wrote in the same and traveled and spoke French and German. The more languages, the better. And we weren't doing a lot of bathing, so the best perfume and high heels and lace, the finest lace. It's expensive. It's like the Rolex watch or I don't know what's expensive. people wear now. If you had the best lace, you had the financial means, and that was masculine, like the peacock's tails. So huge, elaborate collars came in for a while in the 16th century, giant ruffs of the finest lace and lace and lace. And scarring from smallpox could make you bald or make your hair patchy. So you just shave your head, keeps the lice down anyway. And then you'd have the finest wig and the biggest hat, and that's masculine, right? The gray wig with the curls in it, God, that is masculine AF. And like smelling something bad implied that hard work was taking place. Now the smell of sweat, right? Horses sweat, men perspire, women merely glow. Hard work was not masculine. Animals did that, and men who worked hard were animals. You should know a lot of poetry. You should even dabble and write some poetry. You know, florid prose, and when you leave a room, bow out elegantly, right? That phrase, I'm going to bow out of this. I'm going to bow out, right? What happened? In the colonies, that was masculine. What happened? It's not masculine now, right? Well, in war, we have to murder the enemy, and that requires dehumanizing the enemy. If you watch the news, you might think that it's easy for one person to shoot another. It's not. Since in history, women have not really been considered human. Remember, all men are considered equal, right? Remember, thou shalt not kill, but thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. One way to make it easier to shoot men is to turn them into women, to feminize them. So the colonists, when they started to rebel, did this really savvy thing. They feminized British masculinity. The powdered wigs and the lace and the poetry and all that became laughably feminine. And then we redefined masculinity because we can. We redefined it as being muscular and outdoorsy and self-sufficient and ignorant. Poetry and languages speak American and artisanal. Carving your own shit. Not literally your own feces. The things you need, you make them with your own hands, right? Ben Franklin was a silversmith and so on. I got to show you something. Look at this South Korean Jesus. Look at this South Korean Jesus. Look at him. I think they've mixed up Jesus with Conan the Barbarian. South Korean Christianity comes from American Korean War Christianity. We really colonized South Korea when we went to war there. Jesus. It's also arbitrary. It's almost totally arbitrary. It's like looking at the sky and arguing about the shapes you see in the clouds. That's a rabbit. No, it's a duck. And then like wanting to fight about that and vote for president based on whether you think it's a rabbit or a duck. It's also awful. It's stupid. It's called reification. And if you've been in a class with me before, you've heard this word. Reification is when you treat things that are abstract as though they are things that are concrete, in, real things in the universe. That's really a rabbit. No, it's really a duck. No, it's water vapor being interpreted in your occipital lobe. It's nothing. It's not a thing. There's no such thing as a triangle. There's no such thing as the number 2. Right? Sex is a construct, but at least has one foot in the, almost all of 2 feet, just a toe over the edge into construct land. Gender is not a concrete thing. It's a construct. We can make of it what we wish. We have done before on purpose, and we are doing so now somewhat on purpose. We just decide that men can do this and women can do that, and it's okay to wear the clothes you want. Androgyny is fun, whatever you want. Okay. Gender is a construct, but it has real consequences. And so I'm throwing this TED talk into your path too. This is, I should know the people's names. I'm not good at that. The speaker here, he's a Black man with a white grandchild, and his white grandchild has questions about race. And his conclusion, the TLDR on this is, he says, we used to think race was real but didn't matter. Now we know race isn't real but does matter. And we can say exactly the same about gender. It's not real, but it matters. We construct it. Absolutely, we construct it. The way we construct it has consequences for people. Sexual orientation. I guess I explained that. So there we go. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual. We started with straight. Straight and dead, because if you, particularly if you're a man and you're found to be a sodomizer, then you would be hanged. Some countries still like to practice that or intimidate people. It's very political. In a freer society, right? And then America stopped hanging people for it and sent them to jail, and we had the Stonewall massacre, riots. And now almost everywhere in the US, we have this freedom, this new freedom. So then we had straight and gay. Ooh, what about Freddie Mercury? Because Freddie Mercury will have sex with you. He's dead, but in the 80s, he didn't care. He just wanted to have a good time and have a good time naked, and whatever parts were fine with him. Right? Gay, sexual, bi. And then we start to go, what if you're bi, but you mostly like, right? Or mostly like this side? I mean, and then we start to see that it's a continuum, right? Even Kinsey in the 40s could see 7 levels of sexual orientation, between, you know, from straight to gay, all from hetero to homo, all the way through. And now we just go, you know, maybe a trillion point scale, and maybe even you shift around a little bit within constraints over a lifetime, from a spectrum to a continuum. And these seem to be real phenomena, that they're driven largely by biology and then sort of shaped and tempered a little bit by culture. Who's the guy? The last was it? God, I can't come up with the name again right now. A prime minister, president of Iran in the 2000s, and he'd come to America and say there are no gay people in Iran. We go, well, yeah, because you murder them, right? If people express anything like that, they're just murdered. But he was also right. There were people who felt same-sex attraction who did not act on it, or acted so secretly on it as to not be caught. And we wouldn't say they were gay. Gay also has a cultural element to it. I'm not saying it's cultural. I'm saying that there's all this biology, and then way up at the top of the thing, there's a little sociology, and that sociology is really to do with the freedom to act and the freedom to claim an identity based around sexuality. And you wouldn't have that in other places and times, maybe. Certainly not mental illnesses. Up until maybe 1980, homosexuality was a treatable mental illness in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness. It does correlate with depression, anxiety, and suicide, but that's not to do with the sexuality, with the sexual orientation. That's to do with mistreatment by others, and sometimes being forced to live an inauthentic life, and other factors like this. So there are some biomarkers, specifically of male and female homosexuality. They're really small. They're not up to a predictive level yet. They're really just sort of correlations. And there we go. So there's one part of the brain, the left ventral hypothalamus, maybe. I forget. It's not important. And in gay men, the size of this thing is about the size it is in women, not in men. Much has been made of that, but it's not predictive. You can find people who have that same size difference who aren't gay. You know, it's much more common though in gay men than in straight men. If you hold up your non-dominant hand, here's mine. It's my left hand. And we're looking at the ratio of the index finger to the ring finger on the non-dominant hand, right? And this is quite a heterosexual hand, actually, because the index finger is shorter than the ring finger. The ring finger is closer in length to the middle finger. If you look at a hand and the lengths are more like this, oh, that was a neat trick, wasn't it? Where the ring and the ring and the index are equal or substantially equal, you know, or mostly equal, that correlates with homosexuality in males and females. The hell does that mean? The length that, you know, you're sitting there staring at your hand and going, wait, does that mean I'm gay? If you were gay, you'd know about it. You wouldn't need the length of your fingers to tell you, all right? Sit down, Derek. Yeah, and it's just a correlation. It's not predictive. But what this is telling us, among some other evidence, what this is saying is that sexuality, sexual orientation, probably isn't in the genes. Okay, it's in the hormones. It's in the hormones. Those brain differences, you know, couple minor brain differences, that left hypothalamus difference. These are about fetal androgen exposure. And so is this, right? This difference emerges during like the third trimester of pregnancy or something. And if the placenta is not doing a good job keeping out the mother's estrogen, and there's a male baby in the sac, then those female hormones can feminize the baby prior to birth, specifically feminize that part of the brain and feminize this. There you go. Is that moral? I don't know. Certainly it's natural. It's a thing that happens. It's all a shell game. The moral thing or the not moral, or can you withhold from the behavior? It's all a shell game. The central question is this: does the government have the right to regulate adult consensual behavior? Straight people, do you want Uncle Sam peering in your window, making sure you're having sex in the correct government-approved fashion with the correct government-approved person? Libertarians certainly say no. Liberals certainly say no. We agree on this. The difference is really tiny, actually. The authoritarians, true is what I say it is, and true doesn't have to be consistent. Truth is arbitrary. We have one set of rules for one kind of people, a different set of rules for a different kind of people. What if we demonize vulnerable populations? What if we go around saying trans people, you know, kids who identify as trans are just trying to get into the opposite bathroom so they can spy on girls? You know, trans women are really pedophiles trying to get in the bathroom with your kid at the park. What happens when we go around saying these things all the time? Well, look at the anxiety, depression, and suicide rates mentioned above. But also look at murder. Black trans women by per capita are joint with Native American people off reservation for the most murdered people in America per capita. Okay. What happens when we go around and tell people the election was stolen from them and the only way to get it back is violence? And we do that for 4 years. What do you expect to happen? This is called stochastic terrorism. That is, you're not telling one individual person to go out and murder trans people, but you are creating this information biosphere that they're trapped in, where their decisions are influenced, and maybe they were going to be crazy anyway, but you've driven them over the edge with an instruction set. And it's random but predictable. What about evolution? Like, why are you still pushing back on me? Honestly. So the argument goes like this. If there's a gay gene, right, if it's natural for people to be gay, then gay people have a gay gene, and gay people don't have children, so how is the gene passed on? Case closed. All right, take a seat. Gay people have children. Yeah. I mean, especially older gay people, because society put all this pressure on people to conform. And if you stepped out of line, you got hurt. You were unemployable and maybe murdered. And you'd internalize that stuff and feel it about yourself and try really hard to be a good heterosexual conformist person. So for a lot of us, our parents came out after we grew up. Right? You raise a family, you have kids, you've always been dad, but then you go away and you come back mom. Start living that female identity you always felt but couldn't manifest. And the same thing with the sexual orientation. You and your spouse have been muddling through all this time. You knew something was up. You couldn't even admit it to your spouse. And then the kids have grown up and moved out. You stayed together for the sake of them. Then you come out. And it's not genes. We haven't found a gene. It's probably futile to look. It's probably more complicated. It's to do with hormones, and those hormones are actually more about behavior than genetic destiny, because the more older brothers a man has, the more likely he is to be gay, meaning that the quality of the placental sac reduces over time. Having a child takes a lot out of the mother, takes a lot of resources that are not necessarily replenished or easily replenished. So the quality of the placenta declines over time. And if she's had a lot of male children, then, you know, by the 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th male child, those female androgens are, female hormones, estrogen in particular, is seeping through. It's not genetic, but it might have an evolutionary basis. Just let me throw this on you. People misunderstand evolution just as the survival of the fittest. That's like just so stupid. It's really complicated, actually. Everything's really complicated. If anyone tells you a thing is simple, you should automatically be suspicious. Things are complicated. Who knew healthcare was complicated? Everyone but you. Everyone who's ever tried to work on it knew it was complicated. Sit down. So look, we have this impetus to breed, and we want to make as many children as possible. But if you make too many children, then they're competing with each other for resources. Why do we have grandmothers? Why do women lose their fertility between ages 40 to 45 on average? Why does fertility decline steadily until then? Because if you've had children and raised them, and you have more children, those children are competing with your children's children. So evolution would sort of select out, right, and keep the descendants and not make new generations, on average mostly. In the same way, if you're smearing out across like a whole generation, this new generation, if you're like 40 kids and counting or whatever it is, and your oldest child is 30 and you're still making babies, well, they're going to compete. So the last few children, they're good for working the farm. That's, agrarian societies, we tend to have lots of kids. They're good to help work the farm for a minute until they grow up, and then you have to give them some of your land, and it subdivides, and you get a potato famine. Those last few kids, if they're not interested in reproduction, if they're having same-sex relationships, there's more males than females anyway, and they're doing same-sex stuff and not making babies, then those babies aren't competing with your baby's babies. Get it? So there's a rationalization for you, because if you're arguing with me, you're just interested in rationalization anyway. So there's your rationalization on the other side, so you can like swallow this. And that's it. That's all I want to say. I hope that was sufficiently culture war for you. And if you're the culture war person, this is there's no more culture war in this stuff. It's just facts about the differences between primarily males and females. And, we'll talk a little bit about third gender stuff. And almost every chapter, there's a little breakout about what about gay men and gay women. And those are often illustrative that gender is a construct and sexuality is largely constructed, and sex, being the foundation for that. How much is that the thing driving whatever's the phenomenon? Breaking those out into groups can be helpful, so we'll do it. So there it is. I hope you've had fun, and that's it. Lecture's over. Go home.